and welcome back to our series of videos about mineral familiars working with stones. Today we're going to talk to you about a very big subject, the use of stones and other minerals, things like that, in ritual and magic. Obviously this is such a big subject that we won't be able to cover all possible uses of stones in ritual and magic, nor would there be a real point in doing that. What we're going to talk to you about is the basic approaches and types of rituals that we use in our practice, with some examples of the things that we've done with stones. But to begin with, we need to sort of talk to you about the definition of ritual and the definition of magic a little bit, so that we have some clear understanding of what those things mean to us, because that's important too. So, Rawn, would you like to start talking about that?
Sure. This is an interesting question. How do you define ritual or magic? And, you know, I can always come up with some words that fit some circumstances, but it's such a fluid, personal thing that, you know, so much of my life and my existence I would define as ritual and magic. Yeah. It's like when we take Scorpia for a walk in the morning, I'll have 2 pockets full of peanuts, and I place them in places for the crows, and the crows follow us. And this to me is ritual and magic, but it's also feeding the crows. Right. You know, it's all these things. Right. It is a symbolic act, and I think this is a major aspect of magical ritual, is that there is symbolism involved. It can be very literal symbolism, such as leaving peanuts for the crows. But it's more the internal relationship with what one is doing. Ritual for me also, part of that definition is it connects me with something more than just my little tiny mundane existence. It connects me with the crows, or with nature, or with the stones, or with large, you know, higher aspects of my own connected awareness. Right. So these are the 2 main things. Another thing about ritual for me is that it exists. Well, the only thing that exists now. And ritual for me is all about now, being right here, right now. So it's time and place, presence. Without that sense of presence, that sense of being here in this eternal now, not in a present moment, but the eternal now that is infinitely changing. This is where everything exists and where magic exists. Right. Where access to that connectedness exists. Right. I sort of define what I would say are 2 types of rituals, or 2 approaches to a ritual. One is, the first type is purely celebratory, worshipful, honoring, healing, connective. It's not wanting anything. It's really about giving.
It's like when the Druids will come to Stonehenge to celebrate the solstice, a specific time, a specific place, and it's connecting them with that time, place, and nature. That's all the purpose there is to it. It's a ceremonial, celebratory.
Right. It's not about getting good crops or, you know, this kind of thing. Then there's the other kind of ritual, which is transforming something. There's an intention, there is a desire, a result, a gain of some kind. And then, of course, a mixture of these 2. I think the rarest in general is the just purely celebratory, purely just being with sort of a ritual magic. But this is really what occupies David and I the most in our own personal workings. Right. Another defining aspect in ritual is whether one is working alone or whether one is working with others. Alone is fairly self-explanatory, but others is not just other people. Working with others is also working with other stones, working with other animals, other plants, other
places, things.
Right. And then another category here is ritual that is focused internally and ritual that is focused externally. Something that is about an internal transformation or an external transformation of some kind. And so there's all these, so for me it's no one particular thing, and it enters into so much of life.
Right. And of course stones can be used equally in all
of this. Yes. As partners, as tools, as honorees, and in ritual they tend to serve, when we use them, as we spoke of before, either absorptive, holding, or radiant, expressive. And why don't you talk about casting a circle, for example?
Right, yeah. A good example then, when you're casting a circle, you have, in the Hermetic tradition anyway, you have 4 quarters, each of which is assigned to one of the elements. And you could, through your relationship with these stones, with these beings, come to the point where one or some of them suggest that they might want to be used as part of a circle because they are holding the energy or perhaps releasing the energy, and can be serve as sort of anchors for these quarters. So you could have an earth stone, a water stone, a fire stone, and an air stone or set of stones. And those stones could be either energy releasing stones, radiant stones, or they could be energy holding stones. And either way, you'd be able to create a circle with them. But the circle that you create, the process that you go through creating that circle has to be different. If you have an energy releasing circle with stones holding this in place for you, then you have to imagine the circle as an external force that comes from within and radiates outwards. But an energy holding stone is one that pulls and holds the energy in towards the center of the circle. And so there's a different kind of casting involved, and a different kind of relationship involved with the beings that hold the circle. But you can also combine the energy releasing and the energy holding types of stones together, or you could arrange them, as we showed you in the previous video, in certain patterns or certain formations, so that they did something with the energy of that quarter, with the earth, with the air, with the fire, with the water. And this whole process of creating the circle with stones is something that you'll learn intuitively from the stones and from your relationship with the stones. And you'll get to figure out what works, what doesn't work, what kind of stones create which kinds of circles, and so on. Things like that will come for you. But this is just one example. Now, the other things that stones can be used, for example, creating tools. They also have these permutations to them, energy holding and energy releasing. But you have to always remember that the way you use the stone, the approach that you're taking to it, is the motivation of the words that you have in interacting with the stone is what determines, is the largest part of what determines what kind of relationship you'll have with it, and therefore what you will receive in return. So if your relationship with the stone, for example, is, I'm going to make this one by putting this beautiful ruby that I've acquired in this place, and you sit there and admire the beauty of this ruby and so on, you're not going to get very much out of it except to kind of aesthetic pleasure whenever you look at the ruby. And the wand itself is not going to be properly attuned to that ruby. It's not going to be properly integrated with that ruby because it's really just there as an ornament. So everything that you do with stones, everything that you employ them with, that has to be carefully checked against your own selfish motivations often, to see if that's something that you would do to yourself if you were the stone is a good question to ask yourself, and proceed more kind of carefully in this area than you would normally have done so, because we have all of this programming about using these beings. And this is really what I want to come to most of all in this video, is the different approaches that we have to stones. We have these different types of ritual, but there's these different approaches to using stones as well. And I think there's a big imbalance in us towards using things for personal gain. And this imbalance is a collective imbalance, and part of that comes through in our relationship, what we think of as stones being used for in magic. We think of them as being used as directors of energy, amplifiers of energy. They're all things that are useful to us. But there's a whole tradition of magic approaching stones in a magical way, which is not about using them for personal gain or even sustenance or protection, any of these things that relate to us. It's about the stones, and it's about giving something to the stones. We still puzzle, for example, over why the people that built Stonehenge quarried the stones in Wales and moved them all that way to plump them in Salisbury Plain. What possible gain could they have gained from doing that was often the question, but this is the wrong question, because the question is really, what did the stones have to gain as much as what did the humans have to gain, because those people were looking at the stones in a different way and having a different relationship to them. So it was about giving the stones an experience that they had requested, and moving them, quarrying them, moving them into this place, into this space, creating this energy with them. And that is a side of our relationship with stones, the magic of stones, that has really fallen down. And it's something that I've been in my life as a magician, been more heavily involved with than actually taking stones out of nature and bringing them home and doing things with them in my home. It's more to do with going out to nature and working with the stones that are there, especially the big ones, of course, because they can't be moved. And that's where I've gained most satisfaction, most pleasure, and most insight.
We've really lost the sacred space, the sacred place.
The awareness of that.
Yeah. And stones have always been the holders of these major sacred places.
Right.
Because of their nature to retain and resonate with whatever is happening in their environment. And when there is this repeated activity of a specific, ritualized nature in an area, the stones in that area all begin to resonate with that intention and with that, and it becomes a sacred place,
Right, yeah.
And,
sacred ground.
Yeah, and there is no other power like that, really. Going to some big stone and visiting the stone and being there with it. And in rituals like that, it's like we're not using the stone. The stone is essentially using us.
That's right.
And the history of what has been done there is flowing through us, and we are resonating with it.
That's the side that's really been lost, I think.
Yeah.
The two-way interaction.
Mm-hmm. And really what we're proposing, what we're talking about here and working with stones, the stones that we bring home and use, is to approach them in this way.
Right.
These are resonant beings that have an intelligence and awareness that we can work with, if they are willing, you know.
The debility is in us. The lack of perception is in us. That's all. It is there. And to proceed from that point, even if you can't yourself perceive it, proceed from the point of understanding that it's your lack and not the stone's lack that is at fault there. For me, magic is. We talk about magic and trying to define magic, but for me, it's like Rawn said, a very difficult thing to just sort of define for anybody else except yourself. There is, I think, there is a broad definition that works for me, which is that it's what happens when what is inside is in complete harmony with what is outside, and there is awareness of that harmony. There's awareness on both sides of that harmony, and then magic comes into that space of awareness, and stones being these tremendous holders of these record keepers, really. But that's more, the way we think of it, it's more like a magical record keeping, where they're keeping astral and mental records as well as physical ones, as holders of these things and as beings that exist in a very dense state of awareness connected to the now moment, where they're fully integrated with what's happening around them now. They become very powerful teachers of all kinds of magic, because they keep us focused, and they hold energies and radiate energies, and they do this in a way that reminds us that it's all happening now, because that's their state of awareness. So the closer you come to them and their world, the more you resonate with this awareness, with their awareness.
Growing up in Northern California, where everything is so new, all the structures are wood or brick or cement or steel and glass. They're very new, and none of them are really made of stone. But living here in Europe now, it's really clear to me, something that I knew from the large stones that I encountered out in the woods, that always held a history of the events that occurred around them. The buildings here, made of stone, they're all magical tools, basically, to preserve the status quo of the power, political and religious powers. And they're all made of stones that hold everything that goes on in them. And, some of them are centuries and some over a millennia old. And so all this stuff is held in situ, in place in this very rigid structure. And you walk into these buildings, and if you're at all sensitive, you're immediately affected by all of this history and all that it means and all that it, all of its consequence. So just throughout all of human history, we've been using stones magically, ritually. So let's go into a little more detail, starting with some basic types and expanding from there. So 2 basic types. Either we go to the stone in its natural environment and do something there, or we're at home and we have the stone at home and we're doing something there. So for the first example, why don't you give an example?
Okay. The first examples are about basically going to the site and doing something at the place where the stones are. And they might be big monoliths or just the pebbles on the ground. It's not really important, actually. The point that I would like to make about that is that, as I said before, is a very is a very ancient way of interacting with the stones magically that we don't do very much anymore. Our way is more possessive of like, I see the stone, I take it home, and I do something with it at home. I stick it on the end of a wand, or I do something in a circle. But what I'm talking about here is an example of going to a place to interact with the stones in the place and to leave them there, or to do something for the place, for the stones in the place. Something that they can maybe hold, and that can give some kind of some quality to that place. Now, an example of that, which is probably my most successful magical experience of stones, in the sense that it made me feel that I had done everything perfectly right, was very simple. I took a city stone from off the street in the city where I lived, which was London at the time, so a pretty gross city, a big one. And I took it with me around the country on a trek to see all these different places that I wanted to see, like Stonehenge, Avebury, and other places that I wanted to visit. And I left my stone at Stonehenge, so I took it away from the city and left it at Stonehenge, and that was the whole intention of the ritual. In fact, not to go for me to go on this journey, but to actually take this stone and leave it there was the main purpose of why I went there and how it started. So I gave it a new home, and in giving that gift to it, it was one of the simplest things magically that I've ever done. But I consider it the most successful because I felt good, the stone felt good, Stonehenge felt good. Everybody felt happy with that. And it was a very simple, heartfelt gesture, and that's what this magic is really all about. It's just about feeling what you feel in your heart and then just acting, following through on it. And that's often selfless. Because what we feel in our hearts is genuinely loving towards everything. It's really there. It's just got to be felt, allowed to be felt, because it makes us feel vulnerable and unsafe when we feel it in this world. So that is really an example of the type of ritual that we're talking about in this first approach of going to a place, giving something to a place. And it could just be as easy as picking up the litter that other people have dropped.
Yes, indeed. Indeed. Yeah, like we were saying just a few minutes ago, ritual magic, it's really hard to define an exact what is. Picking up the garbage is ritual magic. It's healing, it's connecting. Yeah. An example from me, I lived in a small town in Northern California on the outskirts of it, and on the sloping hills on the acreage there was a perfectly horizontal slab of rock, about this big, probably, perfectly flat, and it was just the perfect altar rock, just perfect. And on it was a smaller little piece of rock that later became which I later took home. And so on this rock, I came to this rock on a full moon at night. And I spent the hours with this rock, sitting on the rock, just really being with this rock. And in that process, connected with what that rock was holding. The information, the experiences of the humans that had inhabited that area some time ago. And in that process was introduced to a very local deity, Rishala, and her consort Ishiwa. And this was so healing to that stone and to that place and to these forgotten deities that none of their people were alive anymore anywhere, and so it helped them reassert their concerns and communicate their concerns about what had happened to the land, and it was really a lovely experience that healed that rock in ways and added to its story. You know, it now contains that as well. And it was completely spontaneous. There was no planning. There was no, you know, it was all right now from beginning to end.
Right.
Required no tools. The other kind is where we have the rock here at home, or you know, have the rock and are going to be doing something with it, or
Before we go there, I just wanted to talk about one other thing. The ritual of going to a rock, to a place where there are big rocks, and doing something there that is for your own personal benefit. I want to talk about an example of from my life of doing that, and to show you an example of what I feel is appropriate and what is not appropriate, because that's very, very important. What is appropriate is when you go to these places and open up your being, open up yourself, your awareness, and connect with what is there. What is not appropriate is when you go with a specific intention to do something and take something from that experience, to be empowered, or to only be empowered, or to only be selfishly to gain something selfishly. This is an inappropriate approach to take. So an example of how these two things kind of work together for me in my life was when I learned that my mother was dying, and I had this grieving process to begin. And I was very fortunate in that I had a good friend who took me out one night to some stones in the UK, in the middle of the night with driving rain, a muddy field. We went up to some stones, and we had an experience there that was, because we were open to it, it came directly from that place, and it was very much connected to that place. It was about spirits and beings that were connected to that place, that were looking for a way to move on. They were not really trapped there, but they were looking for someone to sort of notice them, to be aware of them again, like these deities that Rawn has talked about. And in that interaction with them, I began my grieving process. And it was a very powerful beginning for me as well, because the conversation that I had with these people was a very tragic one. It was a very sad one, their story. And so that experience of going, I specifically went to the site to help me deal with my grieving process. But it wasn't to go and take that away from the site. It was to go and have an experience at that place, and to let that experience heal me, and this place. To go there with the intention of love in my heart, rather than the intention of gaining something.
I've done a large group ritual around a central rock. I was talking about this rock earlier. On the side of a road. It was really a crossroads of native migrations, and it was marked with all these different significant symbols. And we used that stone as a focal point. for our energy that we were all raising. It was a sort of a standard pagan ritual. But this is what that stone had been used for probably thousands of years. So we were working within, you know, its way of being, you know, and what it was used to. We didn't ask it to do anything that it was, you know, we didn't take anything from it really at all.
It's a sharing, you go together with friends.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
It's the key. It's an equal relationship where you're not going to the river to fill the bucket.
Right, yeah. So next in the sequence would be, we have the stone, and we're going to do something for the stone.
Right.
Now we actually happen to have a really good example of this. You want to tell the tale here, and I'll turn the camera around.
Okay. This is a gift that was given to us from our friend Hervé. Hello, Hervé. It's a large channel, or a piece of the channel of amethyst. And what we have done with it is we've helped it first of all by placing something in the centre, because when it came to us, that centre part was like an open wound. That's about the best metaphor that I can give you. And we wanted something inside that. So we put in our cat, which was a gift from our friend Alex. Hello, Alex. When he came and visited me. And those two complement each other nicely, I think you can see. And we put candles around her as well. So she's got 3 candles in front of her at the moment. And the green calcite, which is at the base, I don't know if you can see it in the shot, that gives the cat something to sort of rest upon, as well as being inside it. And it complements the amethyst very nicely. So that's an example of something that we've done for the amethyst to give it I suppose you call an atmosphere that's, that is beautiful for it, that it harmonises with, and that helps to heal what it has experienced. So that's one example of how you can do something for stones, something magical, that gives something to them. Another example that we can talk about is the telling of stories to stones. If you carry a stone in your pocket, you can take it out and tell it stories throughout the day. And another way you can work with this is that you can tell stones specific stories, and that is part of your developing your relationship with them. We do this kind of instinctively anyway with a lot of our stones, but they tend to be things like wedding rings, engagement rings.
And we're not really intentionally telling them the story.
Right. But we're still attaching the story to the stone in a very crude way. Here, what I'm talking about is talking from your heart, with your heart and your soul, really, to the stone, sharing with it your personal experience, and sharing with it stories from the human world. Stones they love stories. They love holding things, and part of that is the storytelling aspect that they have. They will tell you things. They will tell you stories that they have experienced if you are able to open up to them. And in return, it's only fair, I would say, that you tell it some of your stories in return. Now, this can just be a very casual, relaxed kind of interaction that you have that's still magical, or it could be one that's more focused and specifically driven. In other words, so a stone could be told a specific story about a place, or a thing, a human thing that happened at a place, And if you do that right, and you really do open your heart and share that story with that stone, the stone will be wanting to assist if there's trauma, damage, so on. That's its nature. That's just the way things are in nature. They want to harmonize things. So if you're talking about a human disharmony, a war, for example, telling the stone the story of that war, telling it what happened, why, and all of those details, as well as how you feel about it. It's part of what we talked about in the previous video in terms of opening the essential meaning of the stones up through these analogies. The story is an analogy. It corresponds to something for the stone as well, but the stone understands it differently, and it understands it as a factor that needs to be harmonized, as a thing that needs to be soothed, healed, if you like. So that is another way in which we can work with stones, by giving them something. We get something in return, but it's not, the intention is not to get something in return. The intention is to give the story to the stone, because the stone likes to hear these stories. It's not often now that stones get to hear stories from the human world. They used to hear them all the time.
And also listening to the stone's own story is doing, a ritual act that gives to the stone.
Right.
So,
Exactly.
So then we move on to using stones, basically. Partnering with stones in some intentional activity that it goes beyond simply being with the stone. Okay? The example that David gave earlier about using them in the circle casting is I think, a really good example, because it's something that most magicians will at least be experimenting with.
Yeah.
And I've used stones and minerals in my circle casting for decades now. Just instinctively. It started out with small stones, usually little piles of stones in the quarters, that through my interaction with them, it was appropriate and right for them to be in these quarters with the elements. And they were always present whenever I cast a circle. So they began to resonate with the circle and with my intention in each quarter. And in this way became great allies in casting a consistent magical circle, because they would, like, oh, okay, we're ready. Put me here and all. I also came to know through that experience, understand through that experience, that it's possible to use stones as vessels, basically, for the elemental beings, if you will, the guardians of the quarters, which, however you want to conceptualize. And I've advanced with that over the years and have very intricate tools now instead of piles of stone. But both work, just as well as embodiments, and they're basically magical tools. And really the purpose, if you will, of any magical tool is to save time, really, to have that help. So stones that have been used for casting circle often enough and connected with in a good, clean way, are capable of establishing a circle and maintaining a circle all on their own, without any casting really required. Simply placing the stones, in their places around a circle, and you have a circle. I always used stones that I had found or that had found me, that, you know, never something that I bought, never something pretty in that sense, never a crystal cluster or anything like that. It was always things that had come into my life through these more intimate ways. They had greater significance. And, you know, they were willing participants as well. Do you want to add anything about?
Yeah,
because it's such a big thing. You know, we use them in all these different ways personally.
We've talked a lot in the previous videos about things that you can apply at this step, analogies, essential meaning, so on and so on. All of those things must be borne in mind when you're designing something that involves a stone. And so you have to think about its aliveness, and you have to always remember its aliveness, and that it's an equal relationship, that you are not there to impose a thing or a force upon this being, but to share in a kind of reciprocal investigation together. And we collectively have this unfortunate tendency to do just that to the stones, to rip them out of the ground, and stick them on rings and around their necks and off our ears and things like that, without any thought being given to them as living things. And so, because we collectively have this dysfunction, this disease, you must continuously watch for that being present in your interaction with the stones, especially when you are fashioning something involving them and you're creating something involving them. And you know, after a while, your relationship will shift. It will become not something that you have to keep watching for. A negative, approach will basically just slip away out of habit from you watching for it and pushing it aside when you notice it, correcting things inside yourself. It will eventually go to the wayside, because this is not our natural way of being. It's not our natural relationship with these stones. It's not the essential meaning of our relationship with stones. So it's illusory in that sense. And from that point on, once you've gotten beyond that tendency within us to say, I'm going to do this to you, and not really consider or be sensitive to, I should say, the needs of this being, this other being, it becomes a much more magical voyage or experience.
Yeah.
That's when it really will
That's when the magic happens.
become like technicolor, because the stones can then communicate with you fully, and you're giving this thing back. What you're doing with them is giving back. It's an enhancement, an empowerment, a sharing of you as well.
Right. From the stone's perspective, we all exist collectively. It's really the human perspective that is not seeing that collective connection, that collective interaction in everything. So the stone, when it feels invited and has this experience with the human of actually honoring the collectivity and recognizing its aliveness, it brings its whole self then. Yeah. It brings all of its abilities, all of its willingness, all of its, wanting to go, that, just like in a group of people that are similarly motivated and friendly with each other, it brings out something more in us.
Right.
It's the same.
Yeah.
Well, whatever we're working on.
It's the communication that we have with these beings is not like the communication that we have among ourselves, but it's one of resonance, where significance is communicated through resonance, which we largely experience as feeling, but which stones experience not quite the same as feelings, but they do experience feeling. And so when you get to this point where you can work with stones in this way without this collective dysfunction in the way, and the healing relationship then begins. Well, then you learn all kinds of things. There's all kinds of wisdom in these beings that they can then share with you.
And at that point, it's more about spontaneity in your interaction than it is about pre-planning.
Right.
Yeah. When I create one tool that I want to describe for you, and this is a very elaborate tool, which I call the integrator. This was made in 2005 for group work. And this tool is very complex, and I had to do a lot of planning for the geometry of the execution of it. But the entire design and inspiration for it was spontaneous, as with all the other tools I've created. Now this tool involves, well, my medium is cardboard. This is what I use because it's inexpensive and lightweight and easy for me to work with. It's very architectural, and it's also neutral. And this for me, in a tool, materials either have to be active, passive, or neutral. And cardboard is neutral. A branch is passive. It accepts an energy and it flows down the, right? A crystal is active. Wire is active. So cardboard is passive. It doesn't interfere with anything. Or it's actually neutral, rather. It just doesn't interfere, doesn't conduct.
Right.
So this tool has 7 levels. It's a 7-sided shape, a tower, if you will, of 7 levels, each of which is assigned to one of the planets. Each of these levels has 7 triangular-shaped drawers. In the center of the pointy ends of all the little triangular drawers, there is a shaft of copper that rises from the base, which is filled with lead and copper as a grounding, rooting substance. That shaft goes all the way up the center at the focal point of this tower and reaches a platform, a pad, if you will, a surface, atop of which sits a quartz sphere. Built up around that quartz sphere is what I call the cupola, and it is wired with copper as well, that leads from all the what's below into a top socket, a copper tube socket, into which fits another crystal, a double terminated clear quartz crystal. All 49 of these drawers are filled with mineral and vegetable kingdom items. It's filled with samples, pure samples of the planetary metals. In each of the planetary drawers, there's a little sample of the pure planetary metal, along with other pieces of metal that correspond to the planets, other stones, chipped pieces, unchipped pieces, polished pieces, raw pieces, quartz, obsidian, agate, flint, just all kinds of different appropriate mineral things that I've contributed, David's contributed, other people that work with this tool have contributed. There's seed pods from trees, there's decorations from a wedding, there's from a couple of weddings, there's all these personally relevant items have gone into these 49 drawers.
The corresponding drawers.
Into the corresponding drawers relative to the planet and the subplanet. And so this tool makes use of the natural properties of all of these ingredients, all of the wiring, all of the minerals, all of the significance, all of the ideas and the colors that I used, and all the symbolism, all the natural properties of these symbolisms are used. Nothing is forced upon anything in this tool. How this tool is used is energy is gathered and projected into the drawers of this tool, all 49 drawers, just projected into those drawers. And it is then guided to circulate clockwise around all these drawers, which it does now just of its own accord, because everything in these drawers has done this so much that, you know, this knows what to do with energy. Yeah. It takes whatever energy is projected into it, and awareness is often accompanying, we are often accompanying this energy with our awareness. Right. And it integrates all of the little disparate parts of it. All the contents of these drawers symbolically amount to infinity in terms of qualities of essential meaning. They're all symbolically represented in the ingredients of these drawers, and it's so personal at the same time that it integrates all of this energy, any awareness that is projected in as well, focuses it in on that central copper shaft, which again is just using the properties of the copper shaft. And that copper shaft takes all of that energy on all these different levels, because our personal connections with things, including all of that, goes up the shaft and enters that sphere that's sitting above. And then once it's in that sphere, it is concentrated, and we often send that energy out through using TMO for a broader perspective and a blessing, if you will, and bring it back into that sphere, transformed and invigorated, and it becomes a little self inside that sphere of this transformed energy. And again, this is all the natural properties of this sphere. Then we move that energy out of the sphere into the wiring of the cupola. And this is designed, again, physically, astrally, and mentally in such a way that it shoots that energy around and around and around, and it builds it, it amplifies it, and it refines it, and takes it into this really heavy-duty, powerful charge into the socket, the copper socket, that double-terminated quartz wand is inserted into, and it all goes right into that wand, and out of that wand shoots a laser-like beam. Right. And now I've designed this tool so that it can also accommodate 2 spheres instead of the wand. And it can be a quartz sphere, and we also use an obsidian sphere to create different effects. So the integrator is a very versatile tool. Its basic function, though, is integrating any energy into a very pure form that is suitable for multiple variety of tasks. It exists in the south quarter and is a part of a set of tools of similar and even some of them greater complexity than the integrator that are used primarily for group ritual. And this is one thing I find very important with group ritual is their tools are very helpful in keeping group ritual focus.
Yeah, focal points.
Yeah.
Like for the group awareness to be strong, it's a focal point.
Right, and they also enable, because of that focus, they enable a group to do things that the individuals of the group might not be able to do themselves. For example, as a group, we can do all of the same integration and transformation of energy, but with using the integrator, it goes very quickly and very smoothly and very predictably. So the integrator in that circle is the embodiment of the guardian of the south, of the fire, Mikhail, during the circle. That is Mikhail's vessel, if you will.
But it doesn't just bear correspondences with towards Mikhail. It's more correspondences towards the planets, the colors, and so on.
Yes. The tool itself it includes all of the planets.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
It's not just a fire tool. Its action is primarily fiery.
Right.
It's a very active. Shooting out that kind of. So, what you have a tool you want to?
Yeah, the tool that I wanted to talk to you about at this point, being an example of an intentional use of stones in the creation of a magical tool, is the amethyst that I used in the creation of a wand, which has very similar properties to the integrator. The purpose of this wand that I decided to create was that I wanted it to act as a time-saving device, like all tools, but one that would hold for me the current astrological influences. To put this another way, there's a kind of sea of shifting symbolic essential meaning that is communicated to us through astrology, and the fact that it's constantly shifting means that astrologers have to know what's happening up there, continuously keep their mind on what's happening up there. And my idea for this tool was to have a tool that I could use when I didn't want my mind on what's going on up there, but on what's happening in my circle. I wanted a tool that would be able to express the essential meaning that was being communicated to the earth through astrology, and give it direction, and perhaps do other things with it in the process of collecting it and gathering it. So my first decision was to use a copper rod, because it was a grounding, conductive material. Not silver or gold, but copper, because it was important for me to have that grounding factor involved. I've got pretty lofty sort of astromental forces that I want to be able to hold in a physical form, so the copper was the best way for me to do that. And it was a hollow tube, so that I could put things inside the copper tubing that would change or alter or sort the energy as I needed it to be sorted. And it would have a copper cap on the end of it as well, so that I could take the cap off and put it on. So the first thing I did was make that tool. And while I'll go looking for it, and while I was thinking about designing that tool, I was looking for my amethyst. Now I chose amethyst because I said in a previous discussion, the amethyst is an energy releasing or an energy radiant being, but its focus, instead of crystal, is not so much on the mental plane but on the astral plane, and that's where I was collecting my influences from, where I wanted them to be deposited if I was going to be moving them around. So amethyst was a good choice for that. But I didn't just go out and pick the first amethyst that I liked. I went out looking from one amethyst to another, asking each amethyst if it wanted to be involved with me in this work. and using the communication with the amethyst to find the right stone. That was my criteria, to let the amethyst tell me. And it took some time before I found an amethyst that really wanted to do this in this way, on the end of this wand. But I did find one. And then it was basically a process of just putting the whole thing together mechanically. And instead of using wire to amplify the effect, which is what Rawn talked about in the last video, coiling the wire around things, which amplifies the effect, I used string, which I glued to the outside of the copper wire, and I used that because I wanted to be able to paint the outside of the wand a deep violet colour, deep sort of purplish colour, and put some symbols on it for me that represented what I wanted it to do. And so that's an example of how a tool can be created with a stone. And the important point there, I think, is that the way I went about getting the stone to go on the end of this wand made it more of an effective tool, and that it was about collecting the energy, holding it, grounding it, so that's why I use copper, directing it to move in this direction towards the end where the crystal was, by using this coiled string and the symbolism that I put on it, and also my intention, and that would carry it through to the end of the amethyst, where it would then be directed and transformed by the amethyst and directed somewhere. A very simple tool, but one that I've used many times and had a great deal of enjoyment using, because it was one that evolved as a collaboration with this amethyst rather than one that I just decided I was going to do it too.
Right. I need an amethyst.
Right.
Yeah. Anyone will do. Yeah, and all of the really elaborate tools that I make, using one tool that I have made has 32 separate double terminated quartz crystals in it, and a sphere. And each one of those is individually chosen for that specific position, and it's always this process of communication with it. And, you want to be Papa? Kind of interaction. Yeah.
This communication is not vague. It might be vague in the beginning, but it attains great clarity, and it becomes very straightforward. Yes.
Talking about the beginning.
Yeah. You know when something feels right.
Yeah, I think that's a basic criteria for working with stones together for a purpose. Does this combination feel right? If it doesn't, then do something else with it. Yeah. And it will guide you. The interaction will guide you as to what's the best combination sequence. So ultimately, we encourage you to work with stones.
Yeah, they are lovely, lovely beings, and it's us. As I said before, the deficiency in this relationship is definitely in us, and not in the stones. They are, in a sense, more alive than we are.
And all these techniques that we've been describing, and as fundamental to how we work with stones, can be applied to working with anything. And I think really it should be applied to working with anything, a plant, with each other, with everything we interact with.
Yeah. So that's what we have to say about ritual and magic, at least for this video. That's the end of our discussion about mineral flares. We have a video which we'll hopefully be able to present to you next week. We're not sure we're going to be able to make a video next week or put it up next week. We'll find out we've got internet.
Internet. Change over. Mercury retrograde.
But if we do, we'll be putting up a video in which we are answering the questions that have been put to us since we began this series of videos, and we'll answer all of the questions that we have
In one go.
And so now is the week for you to get your questions in if you have any questions that you haven't put to us yet, and we'll get to them in the next video. After that, we haven't quite yet decided what we're going to cover, so if you'd like to see us talk about something, then let us know.
Scorpio says goodbye from her bed.
She's in her cave. She wasn't paid enough.
Yeah, her union wages are shit.
But she sends her love, and so
she does. And she did our hair today.
Yeah.
She did a really good job of it. Bye.